I like when I get to learn things. That's exciting too. So, no, I don't know. I don't know physiology. I'm going to talk to you about behavior, emotions, and all about the mind. That's the exciting stuff for me. Delayed, right? How do I know? There we go. So I'm going to talk about how to actually recharge your body. Part of the reason why I'm actually talking about this today is Dr. Nawanda talked to you about hypothyroidism and adrenal fatigue, and it is no joke. Like, I seriously went through burnout for about a year and a half. What that looks like when you have adrenal fatigue is, Joyce will tell you, it's not pretty. Kind of like, when you have the flu and you just ache and you're so tired and you don't want to do anything? It's like that for a whole year, and then you add PMS on it. That's adrenal fatigue. I never knew for real that there was such a thing as like hitting the wall. I was always just like, you muster through, you push through, you actually get it done. And that, to me, I always thought was one of my strengths. I always had that level of determination. And I had no idea that it would actually be debilitating and crippling. And by the way, when I went to my medical doctor ran blood tests and said, oh, you're all good. You're fine.
Oh, yeah.
So Dr. Nawanda actually healed me. So while you saw me running around over here getting things set up, that's because I don't have adrenal fatigue, which is nice. All right, you're going to see me get stressed. Now I probably flipped through. I got impatient. So one of the things I do is I talk about workplace stress. If some people can experience some of that. Is it on a delay pause, Mark? Or just doesn't like that slide? I don't know. All right. This, I don't know if you could tell what emotion that is.
Outrage.
Right? Absolute outrage. You know people like that. I've been that. And then I don't know who the heck I am. A couple things that people don't realize. By the way, emotions are contagious. So when you're around somebody like this, the studies actually show, this is fascinating, if you suppress your emotions, let's say you're really mad and then you're just trying to hold it together, the person beside you, their blood pressure goes up. All these people, all these situations are actually impacting you. The victim mentality is probably my pet peeve. Oh, I've tried that. That won't work. No, it doesn't matter what I do. No. That's a high level of stress for that person because it's basically a helpless state. You've got blame. Oh, you got it. You've got people that blame all the time. I never see that in drama in the workplace. The manipulative person. I didn't realize there's people that actually like to stir the pot. So when other people get stressed out, they kind of chuckle. Kind of evil, but there are people like that. And then there's the gossiper. I was dealing with a company with a high level of gossip, and they have no idea how destructive that is because there's no level of trust. And when you're in a work environment where you don't feel safe and there's not a high level of trust, you're going to end up dealing with a high level of stress. So when you deal with a high level of stress, we talked about what burnout looks like. Obviously, there's premature aging. It impacts your immune system. The studies actually show the higher stressed you are, the more you're going to smoke, the more you're going to drink, the more you're going to eat, the more you're going to pull your hair out, the higher likelihood of cancer, the higher likelihood of heart disease. All of that is directly related because when those chemicals start going into your body and you don't actually have a chance to recharge, it's hurting your body over the long haul. I don't know. Uh-oh. All right, pretty graphics. Why is it delayed for me, Mark? It's a test on how well I can endure stress. So one of the things that people don't often talk about when we're dealing with stress is we actually make it worse. Let's be honest, because there's some people who seem to manage stress pretty well and then other people that just don't seem to manage stress. So how we perceive stress actually impacts how it's going to affect us physiologically, emotionally, mentally, and everything else. So Nawanda talked about being chased by a tiger. I'm going to talk about being chased by a bear. So our bodies were wired so that the adrenaline and everything else kicks up so that we can run, right? We're chased by the bear, we're running, we get away from the bear, oh, phew. Theoretically then, we go, okay, I'm safe now. Now I can actually recharge, right? But that's actually not what happens when we actually end up perceiving the stress. What tends to happen is, oh my God, I was chased by a bear. What if I actually got hurt? Oh my God, how would I pay for the hospital bills? I wouldn't be able to afford that. Would my insurance even cover that? Gee, I should research that. God, what's wrong with me? I should already know that. What if I died? Who'd take care of the kids? God, Johnny's already having problems. He's going to end up in jail. Nothing changed in that situation. In both situations, you escaped the bear. The difference is the negative thoughts that you had perpetuated the state of stress. And so we don't often feel like we can control our thoughts or we can control our emotions. But we absolutely can. And if we're not aware that that's going on, do you know how many thoughts we have in any given day? 60,000. One guess the percentage that's negative.
A lot.
59,000.
Yeah, I know. It's a lot. Two-thirds are actually negative. And you want to know the most disturbing part? They're the same thoughts we had. Out of those percentage, 90% are the same thoughts we had the day before. So we repeat the same negative thoughts over and over and over again. So even if, and you guys know this, if you've had a hard time falling asleep and you're ruminating, where you're like playing something over in your head, and you're really and you're like, I'm going to say something. And so then you start thinking what it is that you're going to say. And once you come up with it, that's not enough, because then you go, and another thing. Oh yeah, I'm going to add this too. And you may spend hours in that state of literally arguing with that person who has no idea you're even angry. You've now lost sleep for hours, and what you don't know is the impact that that has on your body was a continual stress response because you perpetuated it with your mind. That's a scary thought to me. Talk about being negative. So daily hassles and our reactions. I like, Nawanda, that you talked about being in a car, right? If I got to drive up to Gainesville yesterday. It's actually a really nice drive, right? It's on 75 the whole way. I'm like, bloody, I listened to music the whole way. It was peaceful and it was relaxing. I hit Tampa traffic. So I'm still driving, right? My task has not actually changed. Granted, there's more obstacles in my way, but the only thing that's changed is how I'm perceiving that. I get that it's annoying externally, but we can still control our thoughts to be able to control the stress. We wonder why there's things like road rage. Well, that's because people who can't control their stress and they're already burnt out, one last thing just tips them over. That's why we have a show called Snapped. It's just one other thing, right? So because I had adrenal fatigue, I've worked always doing different types of coaching and helping people with their mindset in relation to business, and money and success. I'd never looked at it in terms of stress. And I figured that since I went through it, there was a lot I had to change about my own thoughts to actually recover quicker. A year was long enough. I didn't need it to be any longer than that. So I had to get very clear on what my own thoughts were and what was actually contributing to the stress. So if we talk about the brain, which is my favorite part of the body, so do you guys know what makes us different from animals? Prefrontal cortex. That's this part right here. The prefrontal cortex is your forebrain. So we're the same as animals in the back part of the brain, which is part of the amygdala and limbic system. What makes us different from animals is we have the ability to think about our thoughts. So consider that for a second. When I come home and my dog's all excited and their tails are wagging, they're excited. They're not thinking, oh, mommy's home. Or, gee, I'm excited, mommy's home. They do not have that capacity. They're purely in the moment. And in that particular moment, they just experience what they experience. Now, I took the dogs to the dog park and another dog growled. Totally primitive. That dog isn't thinking, I don't like that dog, I'm going to growl. And my dog isn't thinking, oh, I wonder why he doesn't like me, right? It's just, oh, doesn't like me, I'm going to go on over here. What happens when we activate, have you all heard of the amygdala hijack?
Yes.
When we are threatened, and I'll talk about what constitutes a threat, that hijacks the primitive part of the brain. The primitive part of the brain is the fight or flight response that's now been elongated to fight, flight, freeze, or appease. And I like the appease part because you know those people that are like, yeah, okay. And they have no intention of doing anything that you said, they just nod. That's their way of actually dealing with a particular threat. When that's activated, your body is as if it's responding to being chased by a bear. Literally the exact same thing. The prefrontal cortex is how you think about thinking. It's how you make decisions. It's the rational part of your brain. But when we've activated that part, the prefrontal cortex doesn't exist. We are animalistic. And then we do really stupid things because we're not using the executive part of our brain. So I'll talk a little bit about how to trigger different parts of your brain so that you can temper some of this amygdala hijack. And the amygdala hijack, if you've ever surprised yourself, like you were just saying, Dr. Marie, like you just lost it all, right? It just got triggered. Totally snap. That's why I have a whole show on it, right? New studies show that if you get pissed off for 15 minutes, now if we don't know that being pissed off is involved, like as part of our wiring, that baby's pretty pissed off. Getting angry for 15 minutes, same impact on the body as smoking a pack of cigarettes. Jeez. We know all the side effects of actually smoking, right? How dangerous it is to your body. How many times throughout a day do you get pissed off? I know. I mean, if you were in traffic, let's say you were in traffic bumper to bumper for an hour, you just smoked like 4 packs of cigarettes. I'm trying to go faster, but it's not helping me. Oh, at that one? Oh, that might work. Stress and burnout, we talked all about this. I want to teach you guys how to handle the stress. You want to know how to handle the stress? These are all the techniques that I've actually adopted for myself, and I literally have hundreds. So I'm going to go through 6 different ways that you can handle stress. Pick and choose the ones that you want. How we label emotions, reappraisal, optimism, true optimism, not what we think, compassion, mindfulness, which is related to meditation, and then bounce, which is my personal formula for developing resiliency. One of the things that we have primitive emotions. We have basically 7 primary emotions. This is 6. So we've got disgust, easiest one to tell because you wrinkle your nose. Middle one, anger. You see a dog that shows its bottom teeth, run. That's a universal sign. You've got fear and surprise, which people sometimes confuse. Happy. When you look at that picture, does it not make you happy? Do you know that's why emotions are contagious? So in order to read somebody else's emotions, our body mimics them. It's called mirror neurons. And our body mimics them so that we can understand what somebody else is experiencing, and then that tells us whether or not they're safe or whether or not they're a threat. So if you look at a happy baby and it makes you smile, what do you think it looks like when you're working next to somebody who's disgusted all day? You're literally wearing it. It's really that contagious. And then grief. People have a very difficult time in identifying what emotions they're experiencing. As we get older, we don't want to experience emotions, so we just push them down, or we just pretend that they don't bother us. But once that amygdala is hijacked, we're experiencing it whether we know it or not. And I like the people that think, I'm really good at compartmentalizing. I don't wear my feelings. Yeah, you do. Everybody else sees it. It's quite obvious. The easiest thing to do is to label the emotion. Here's what's fascinating. This is the prefrontal cortex. That's how we make decisions. That has language associated with it. So if I'm feeling sad and I say, oh, I'm feeling sad, we're now using this part of the brain, which literally means just identifying the feeling reduces its intensity. And so the whole, therapeutic, well, how are you feeling, actually has validity to it. And yet, if I talk, and I ask my clients all the time, like, what are you feeling? That's a hard question, because sometimes we have a mixture of different emotions going on, and we have a hard time labeling it. If we can't label it, we get stuck in that. And if it triggers the limbic system is associated with memories. And what that means is if you ever talk to somebody who's complaining, and then they go, and then there was this time they did this. And in 1992, they did that. And that triggers this whole cascade of past emotions, which again just escalates the entire stress response. So technique number 1 is actually identify what you're feeling. Technique number 2 is called the SCARF model. SCARF model, so we're wired to focus on negative events, which means because we want to protect our survival, which is good and bad. It protects our survival, but then it kind of makes everything negative at the same time. So when we look at whether or not there's a potential threat, we do it across 5 domains: status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. If you ever walk into a room of strangers and you have the belief that you're smart, then what you're doing when you walk into a room full of people is identifying if you're the smartest person. I went to the oyster roast, which is all attorneys, right, and judges. Well, it's funny because once the attorneys are surrounded by judges, they got nothing. They can't articulate what they're feeling. They feel awkward because they took a dip in status. They're not the most important in the room, the judges. So anytime you feel like you're not as important as the person you're comparing yourself to, you're not as thin, you're not as pretty, you're not as smart, that activates the threat response. Activating the threat response, the amygdala hijack. Your ability to process, problem solve, be creative, and be smart, out the window. Merely because you stood by somebody who was thinner. It's ridiculous. Certainty, when you work in a work environment and they go, guess what? We've got new changes coming. And you feel that there's a lack of stability, threat response. How about micromanagers? That feels awesome, doesn't it? It's because it takes away your autonomy. You know, they say when you're raising kids, do you want to cook dinner or do you want to clean your room? It gives them a choice so they feel like they have autonomy, so it doesn't activate the threat response. If it activates the threat response, then you're dealing with defensiveness. Relatedness is, do you feel like you're similar to people? This is why we have a high level of discrimination. And then fairness. If you've ever worked with somebody on a project and you felt like you did the majority of the work, you know what that threat response actually feels like. So once that threat response is activated, we can reappraise how we perceive it. We're running a tad over. Okay, if you all have to leave, I'm not going to be upset, but I'm going to keep going. So if you look at, and I'm actually doing a presentation tonight on Facebook Live on true optimism. People think optimism is like all roses and sunshine and, oh no, it's not going to bother me. That's fake. That's not optimism. Optimism is how do you actually interpret events. When they used to do studies with kids on the playground, if one kid walks by another kid and bumps him, if one kid thinks that he did it intentional, then a fight comes out. But if the other kid thinks, oh no, it was just an accident, they go along. How we perceive that alters it. People that are optimistic in a negative event perceive it as specific, focused on the environment, and temporary. So I did this where I gave everybody a different crappy situation. So one, the dog died, the husband cheated, they lost their job, like bad stuff. So what do you say to yourself when those things actually happen? If you lose your job and you get laid off and you say, bad things always happen to me. I knew it was going to be me. It doesn't matter where I go. It's going to happen everywhere. That's called pervasive. So it's not, oh, it was just this job. It's every single time. And if you get in a fight with somebody and they go, you always do that. You heard that one a couple times. He like flat out snorted. That's pervasive, which is pessimistic. So specific is, it's specific to this situation. Environment versus personal, meaning do you have a sense of control over what's going on? People that have a sense of control feel like I can handle this. The victim person at work feels like they can't control it. So the optimistic person has a sense that I can control the environment, I can control myself. And then temporary, which is my favorite mantra to say, this is what I said when I had adrenal fatigue for an entire year, it's only temporary. It's only temporary, I just got to get through this. Somebody who's pessimistic is like, it's never going to end. right? There's no end to this. So sometimes it's a little thing, and I'll say it's just temporary. We literally can control those thoughts. The only reason I know this is when I was in school 25 years ago, there was a book called Learned Optimism. And Martin Seligman, who was the one that initially researched it, I happened to learn this when I was in my 20s. And it was revolutionary for me because I don't think I would have known what optimistic really was. And so we can look at that. Now, it gets a little confusing because if a really good thing happens, if you win the lottery, then your explanation style should be that way. So it actually flips. But I'm not going to get into all that. Mindfulness. Have you all heard of mindfulness? Mm-hmm. So meditation is where you sit and quiet your mind. I can't do that. And then asking me to set aside 20 or 30 minutes a day to devote to that means that I'll sit there for 20 or 30 minutes ruminating about all the things I could be getting done in those 20 to 30 minutes. Not going to be highly productive for me. I do love, by the way, guided meditation. So if I can listen to somebody who kind of calms me down, highly effective. And I like some of the new apps that are out that actually help with that. But mindfulness, a part of meditation, is how we get in the present moment to quiet ourselves. And so in mindfulness, when we're worried about when we're thinking about the future, we're worried about what could happen. And anger is about what previously happened. When we're in the present moment, when we're in the now, we're just focused on what's going on. So you're all listening to me, but you're not necessarily present in the moment. Let me ask you, how do your feet feel? That's weird, isn't it? You weren't paying attention to your body at all. But all of a sudden you became mindful of what your feet are doing. Mindfulness is paying attention without judgment. That's the hard part. So if I say, look around the room and identify all the things that are black, you would begin to pay attention to it. And it grounds you, it centers you. That's why being in nature is so calming, because all of a sudden we stop and we start focusing on, there's obviously oxygen and other benefits as well. But when we get really centered and grounded in terms of what's going on, we can't possibly be grounded and then worrying about the future. So mindfulness is a very good technique, and there's different ways to do it. There's body scans, there's breathing techniques. If you're interested in this, I did a certification on mindfulness-based stress reduction for teens. I literally have hundreds of activities that I'm happy to share with you. I'm going to give you one fun activity. Mark is going to help me. I brought blueberries for everybody, and I'm going to teach you what mindful eating is. Mindful eating, by the way, for somebody who likes to emotionally eat, is a good practice for me. I actually did a mindful eating luncheon. Okay, this is going to take a long time. Can you split some on like other plates, and then each row gets one?
Yep.
The son of a Southern Baptist. Had that technique down.
No, but the one technique I do have is we're going to take an offering at the end.
I did this with strawberries, and it actually worked really well, but the problem was people were standing there holding. Yeah, and I was like, okay, I didn't think through that part. Okay, once you get your blueberry, so we're going to practice mindful eating. We're just going to take a mindful bite. Don't eat it yet. We want to use all 5 senses for this activity. So when you get your blueberry, I want you to start with the sight. So I want you to actually look at it and notice. Notice the color. Notice the texture. It's a little purple. It's a little blue. Are there bumps? Right? You're eating some. Smell. Take a smell.
Blueberries don't smell.
Yeah, the strawberries smell better. Touch. What does it feel like to you? Is it smooth? Is it rough? Right? Is it slippery? Now I want you to take a bite and taste it. Savor each moment. Is that not like the best blueberry? And then the sound. Was there a squirt? Is it juicy? What you got going on? So mindlessness is when I've had a stressed day and I grab a big bag of potato chips and a pint of ice cream and I eat it while I'm watching TV. There's no mindfulness in that. I go, how are we out of chips? I know, like, they didn't even fill, like, that's what they do now. You open the bag and there's only like 3. How did I go through the whole bag? Well, our mindfulness is being in that moment. And if we were mindful with our food, if we were mindful with people, in our interactions, we'd have a lot less stress and a lot less conflict. But the problem is, when we're on our phones, when we're driving, when we're working, and we're multitasking, this is out the window. And this is literally the gateway to peace. Compassion and empathy. So cortisol in the brain, when we get stressed, actually shrinks the brain, which is fun. So cortisol in the brain activates the amygdala, and if you do that enough times for prolonged stress, it actually shrinks the brain and strengthens the connections with the amygdala. So the more stressed you are, good news, you're more likely to be stressed in the future because you're treating your brain, you're conditioning your brain that that's how you want to react. It releases cortisol, and a way to get past cortisol is oxytocin. Does anybody know what oxytocin is? I know you guys know. Oxytocin is the wonderful chemical that's released after you have sex that makes you want to sleep and makes you love everybody. So it's called the cuddle hormone. So the reason why massage and touch therapy is so important is it actually releases oxytocin. When you touch somebody that you like, you want to be touched, otherwise it's a hijack, and then it doesn't work out well. But if you like that person and you touch that person, it actually releases oxytocin, and oxytocin actually enhances trust and a sense of safety and a sense of well-being, and then it activates the parasympathetic nervous system. So if you look at the picture of a baby, just looking at the picture of a baby, there's now what's called priming, which means if you're stressed and you look at a series of positive images, it can change your mood in as little as 3 minutes. And I'm developing something so people can just sit there and watch and actually get it done. So I was really stressed the other day, and my dog is just a happy, happy dog. And so I was like, let me just pay attention to the dog. He's happy. And I could literally feel myself. Like, it almost like melts away. Now, the trick is not to go back to like the racing thoughts, right? To actually stay in that. And it's almost like if you go to the gym because you want to work out and you want to develop biceps, you have to do this same thing repeatedly as a practice over and over, because that's not what we've been doing up until this point. So we're retraining our brain, which shows that we're actually able to do that. So seeing positive pictures, being around somebody that's happy, taking something, I call it a happy place, where you can visually imagine it, can release the oxytocin and decrease some of the stress hormones so that we can function better. What tends to happen, though, is we like that negative thought, because anger, by the way, is very powerful, right? Anger allows you to take action. So sometimes we're happy we're angry, and we don't want to shift it. And then we don't understand that staying there means we're just going to keep smoking. So we have to make the choice not to do it. You've all heard the benefits of gratitude. The studies on gratitude are amazing. Literally, before you go to bed, when you start falling asleep, you know, you kind of go into, you get really calm and you're kind of half awake, half asleep. That's the best time to actually activate your subconscious mind. So one of the things I started at the beginning of this year is every year before I go to bed, I identify 3 things that I'm grateful for. It changes how I sleep, and it impacts my subconscious mind. I don't even have to do anything. It does it while I'm sleeping. And then I wake up actually happier. It's one of the easiest things to do to be happy. Happiness is kind of interesting because you know how if both my parents are overweight, then I'm likely going to be overweight because it's just genetics. Right? That's what people used to say. Well, there's genetics, but there's genetics that can actually be altered. So clearly, you can change your lifestyle, and then you wouldn't have to be overweight, or you wouldn't have to have heart disease or whatever goes along with that. Happiness has a very similar set point. Genetically, if your parents were happy, positive people, you'll be happy or positive. And if they were depressed, you're more likely to be depressed. But that only accounts for like 30 to 40% of our happiness. Guess what the other percentage is made up of? Habits. It's just what we repeatedly do. So count your blessings and having gratitude is the easiest way to actually infuse happiness. And lastly, I have a program called Bounce, which is what I've spent the last 5 years creating. Resiliency is the ability to overcome adversity. I never once considered when I was creating this that adversity was very closely related to stress. So if you want to go to the gym for your mind and actually practice resiliency techniques, I have an upcoming workshop. Just let me know about that if you're interested in that. And then it's called Bounce, because it's all about bounce back from adversity, and that's that. I went like way over. I went over only